I know that I'm standing between you and drinks, and that we've heard everything. So trying to synthesize it in this moment is going to be really hard, though I'm going to certainly put it to these two fine gentlemen to do exactly that. But also, to your point, there needs to be a longer conversation. To an extent, we've been talking about this for a very long time. So, but how we actually synthesize this and bring it together, and who takes the lead, is something that we really do need to think long and hard about, because otherwise we'll go away, all these great aspirations will fall in a heap, and we'll do as we always have done. So that it was a really good point. Where to from here? But I'm going to ask both Peter and Mark to have a go. Peter's going to start with trying to bring it home with some of the issues that we've talked about today, and most importantly, what now?
Thank you, Catherine. This will be fairly idiosyncratic because it's my bringing together the themes, so others will have their own views, and I'm sure Mark will also add and subtract to mine. But the themes that I saw through the day was, firstly, there's a piece around government leading by example. And I think we've heard that a number of times. Government is both a large employer and a large interest in ensuring that Australia has engineering skills to meet the demands that we need for a brighter future. So there's a piece for government leading by example. There's a piece around AQF and micro-credentials and stackable pathways, all of that bit. There's a whole bit around AQF. There's a bit about broadening the intake. And we can't just keep getting what has been in the past predominantly a male nerd. And I'm being fairly colloquial in putting that together. But we need to broaden that intake because the profession is itself demanding more skills that are not just those technical skills. Hugh described it as team, but I think it's more like pie-shaped people. So we need to think more about broadening the intake. But if we do that, we need to both scaffold their learning and ensure that they succeed through the programs that we offer. So it's not just about bringing them in, about ensuring success at the end. I think there's a bit around what is international best practice. We heard a little bit of that at the very end about what the UK have done and their ambassador program and forming a company with that specific task. Maybe we need to hear that in more detail. Maybe we need to hear what Japan has done. Maybe we need to hear what Germany has done in terms of the percentage of engineers as a fraction of the total graduation out of universities. Maybe we need to hear from Canada around what they've done in terms of cooperative education. I was lucky enough to spend a year at University of Waterloo, which runs the largest co-op program in the world. That we need to hear more of that. And so one of the actions may be for the Academy and Engineers Australia to collaborate around bringing that knowledge more directly to us so we can learn and pick the eyes out of what has worked elsewhere. There's certainly a bit about school curriculum and the branding and the words that we use to describe that, because it seems like engineering has got lost. Even if engineering is being taught, it is not branded as such. You know, I think before this, Mark and I had a discussion around the only reason E is in STEM is to give it a vowel. Well, you know, maybe that's the case. And we need to have an invested outcome in that, and engineering needs to be much more visible in school education, both primary and secondary. There's a bit, I think, around the nature of Australian engineering industry and the role that small to medium enterprises play, and both the strengths and weaknesses that bring. And maybe the idea of a cooperative skills centre, which I think is Mark's idea that's been picked up by Mary and her group, maybe there's a role for that in being the broker of work integrated learning placements and other aspects of that aggregate those experiences for our student base. So this is like what's happened in apprentices. We think about apprenticeships. Apprentices now often don't spend their entire indentured period with one employer. They actually move between employers. And maybe that's a role that the Cooperative Skills Centre could play in brokering relationships across multiple employers. Well, I'm just checking off what I've got here. There's something about the ATAR, and that's another ball of wax in there about, does it bias student selection? Yeah, it's a can of worms, that's for sure. And whenever I've been asked about, how would you advise a student, I always say, pursue your passion and forget about ATAR. ATAR will take care of itself. Or there are multiple pathways into the degree structures these days. Choose what you're really interested in is the best and only advice that any of us should ever offer. Look, I think lastly, I would add, all through the day, we've said that this is a wicked problem and that scale and complexity are making it difficult to see the way through. But isn't that what engineering is about?
Thanks very much, Peter. You've certainly shortened what I'm going to be saying. I'm sort of just summarising the key points that I heard today. The first one, I think, is the sort of what's the burning platform, what's the compelling statement that we need to get out there. And I think that's essentially the scale of the challenges we're facing. I think Grant mentioned it, it was the premise behind what we put together, George. There's just so many major nation building projects underway at the moment and will be underway for the next 10 to 15 years, where if this is not addressed in some way, shape or form, then as a country, we're going to be in real strife. And I think this is a really compelling piece that we can put to government. Government at the moment, for some reason, seems to be thinking more than sort of what's going to happen in the next 18 months. And maybe because it's a federal government confidence that they're going to be re-elected, I'm not sure. But that, I think, gives a place where we can actually start putting this forward from a political cycle, because it will be a federal issue to address. People have mentioned a lot of the challenges of doing this around 7 states. I'm going to look at this a little bit chronological. There's been lots of talk about the challenges of maths teaching in schools. I really liked Glenn's data, I have to say. And listen, this is a challenge. Everyone knows it. It's not got a quick fix. It's certainly not in the time scale. Even if we started addressing it now as a profession, we probably wouldn't see the benefits for that for at least 10 years at best. And the real challenge appears to be that it sort of reduces the confidence of people to do things which require mathematics. And this is a real issue with pipeline into degrees. There are multiple programs, I've been associated with a number of them, that actually take people that have relatively low maths attainment coming out of the school system and address it in early stages of university system, and relatively after a year or two you don't pick the difference between how they're performing. And that can be done because it's not an ability, it's an opportunity to receive that education. So I think we shouldn't be so pessimistic and essentially just throw it in the bucket and say it's a school problem and we're not going to be able to address it. It can be addressed. The one piece, and I think this reflects back to what Mary was saying, is it does then cost a bit of money to fill up that gap within the university system, at the same time as recent government funding changes reduce the amount of funding going into engineering. So there is a sort of a policy piece there that really needs to be dealt with by government, and that is something that these groups can advocate for. The other part that I think we need to keep an eye on is this is a sort of a somewhat localized problem. The point was made that we don't have a STEM education in schools problem in the Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra triangle. But we also need to keep in mind that if we're going to be increasing the number of engineers, the increases are not going to come from the Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra triangle. We're sort of tapping out a bit on what we're going to be getting there. It's got to be from a different area. And that then comes to how do we then increase the pool coming in? And that is sort of what I just mentioned, is dealing with people who haven't had the maths background. But it's also providing mechanisms for people who, because they didn't decide to do engineering at 17, to provide mechanisms for them to come in and to be in the profession. And that, I think, is a really powerful piece, particularly when you look at the number of people who change professions through the course of their career. But because of the structures we've got in engineering, not too many of them move into engineering. There's a nice pathway to move out of engineering, but there's not a particularly easy pathway to move into engineering. And this is something that actually came from that report, the STEM Skill Future from ATSE, which is essentially lifelong STEM learning. And this is something I think we need to look at. And a part of that actually comes from essentially providing income support to people who want to participate in this training, or at least not make them pay for the training, which is the current situation. And that segues probably into that we need to diversify the field, which is the demographic in a whole lot of different ways, which are coming into the engineering profession. There's some really stark statistics were put forward by Marlene and a couple of people. We have all of these immigrants have come into the country, and we're just completely and utterly missing them in terms of participating in the engineering profession. That's the first challenge we've got. The second is the one that we talk about a lot, which is the gender diversity challenge. And this is quite stark as well. And there's a leak in the pipeline at every stage. Mike mentioned don't be woke, but I couldn't help but note that there were 2 panels on this stage which had one gender only, and only 2 that had a gender balance today. Now, you can't be what you can't see. I don't think there are too many people here thinking transitioning into engineering, so it probably wasn't too much damage done. But it's something we need to be aware of at all times when we're actually looking at trying to move the profession forward. The final point that I want to make is we need to then look at different types of people contributing to the engineering profession. Hugh mentioned, and so I'm sort of adding it to the list of things I disagree with Hugh on, that we don't have an engineering shortage. And he may be right with different types of engineering skills. But if you look at anyone who's trying to recruit someone to do an engineering role at the moment anywhere in this country, I think they will probably join my side of the fence in terms of the argument with Hugh. And so this is something that we need to keep in mind on. And a part of it is the accreditation issue and the AQF. I think the two are sort of linking in together, that we do need to have regulation. I don't want to drive home over a bridge that was designed by someone whose qualifications weren't confirmed, or fly home in a plane in a similar situation. But we do need to recognise that it's not an either or when it comes to accreditation of engineering skills. And I might finish up there, Catherine. Thank you.
I get the last word? Awesome. I had the first word and the last word. How lucky. I want to leave with that one extra message. I agree so strongly with everything that has been said. But something else, and we picked up a couple of times on it, various people have, Australia has grown fat and happy digging stuff up and growing stuff. It won't last. If we want to continue the quality of life that we have in Australia, even if you're struggling as a renter, but seriously, we are as a country doing really well. We need to keep up with the next generation of technologies, of industries, and we need the engineers to do that. So that's my first point. The second is, again, to that sort of cultural issue of Australia. We do not value teachers, let alone engineers, but we don't value teachers the way, for example, in the Nordic countries, they are valued, and we don't pay them accordingly either. And I think it was Glenn that made some comments that were potentially controversial, and some people might agree with them, but we don't value them, we don't pay them well. I'm talking as somebody who has a stepson as a teacher, so I know how hard it can be. We need to change our cultural attitude to engineers and to teachers. So how do we market engineering broadly and teaching as an absolutely important foundation for that? How do we think in the future about marketing those to change the culture of Australia and our attitude there too? So I'll leave that as a kind of really big problem that we need to think about, but we've really got to get all of that right, or none of the rest of it's going to happen. A quick one from a personal experience at uni. Those of us who went into chemistry to do our degrees who did not have a strong enough maths, where we who did could do other subjects as minor subjects, they who did not had to do maths, and they all came up to speed. So they didn't have zero maths, but it wasn't good enough, or they didn't have an A level in it, and they had to do it as an adjunct. And by the end of second year, they were up to speed with the rest of us. So it's not easy, but it can be done to draw people through as well. So I'm going to leave everybody with that. I think the next most important thing is, how do we bring this together? How do we find some sort of coordination? I mean, Engineers Australia and ATSE, as two leading institutions in this field, really need to work out how we can coordinate on a countrywide basis, a plan to go forward to actually address this problem. So having just given it to my poor team to work out what to do next, sorry, Peter. Yeah, I know you need to thank me for that. So now to thank everybody else. George, you and the New South Wales division have put an enormous amount of work into pulling this together. I'm disappointed we didn't have more people here. I know there's a lot more online. I hope this is being recorded, because we have had such a wealth of people and their insights up here sharing, that we really need to find a way to spread the word further, because it's wasted on the few of us who kind of were already converts. We need to get that really valuable set of insights out further. So we need to think about how we do that. But thank you, George, and to everyone in the New South Wales division of ATSE who brought it together. Thank you to the ATSE staff who've worked tirelessly to actually deliver it, including on the day. So thank you to everyone. Peter on the policy side, of course, is now been charged with how to do something about all of this. And Kelly and Alexandra doing it all on the day to make it happen. And Engineers Australia for hosting, for also pulling it together, and for your collaboration. It's been great, really appreciate it. And thanks to all the amazing speakers, many of whom are still in the room, for your incredible insights, and really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm standing between you and drinks, and I think we're a few minutes early, so you can thank me later.